Frank Miller was 83 years old, but when he stepped into the courtroom that morning, everyone noticed the quiet force in his presence. He walked slowly with a cane, his old military jacket folded neatly over his arm. The fabric was faded, but the respect it represented was clear. People softened their voices as he passed, sensing the weight he carried. Comment where you're watching from. He lowered himself into the chair with care, breathing unevenly. His hands trembled as he adjusted the medical band beneath his shirt. The charge was small, a missed stop at a traffic signal, but something about him made the courtroom settle into silence. Judge Frank Caprio greeted him kindly. "Good morning, sir. How are you feeling today?" Frank tried to smile. "I'm managing, Your Honor, just not as strong as I used to be." Before the judge could ask more, the young prosecutor jumped in quickly. "Your Honor, the defendant failed to stop. We ask that the fine be issued without delay. We have many cases today." Judge Caprio lifted a hand, reminding him to slow down. "We'll take our time here." The prosecutor sighed, annoyed. "It's a routine violation." Frank kept still, swallowing hard. He did not want sympathy, just a moment to speak. The judge noticed how he kept touching his chest, steadying himself. "Mr. Miller," Caprio asked calmly, "are you under medical care right now?" Frank hesitated. "Yes, sir. I recently had heart surgery. I'm supposed to attend checkups regularly." The prosecutor interrupted again. "Your Honor, his medical information does not change the facts." Frank unbuttoned the top of his shirt, revealing the medical band strapped tight across his chest and the long scars beneath it. A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Even the bailiff blinked, stunned. "I served this country," Frank said quietly. "I got these while protecting the flag behind you." Caprio leaned closer, his voice filled with respect. "Thank you for your service. Tell me what happened that day." Frank steadied his breath. "The medication they give me sometimes makes me dizzy. I thought I stopped. Maybe I didn't fully. I was just trying to reach the clinic before the pain got worse." The prosecutor shook his head as if tired of excuses. "Everyone has a story," he said sharply. A woman in the audience frowned at him. Someone else whispered, "Show some respect." Frank lifted his chin. "I'm not asking for favors. I've always obeyed the law. I spent decades defending people I never met. My wife used to say I'd come home a hero. Now she's gone. I'm just trying to get through my days without losing the little dignity I have left." Judge Caprio listened closely, noticing every tremor in Frank's voice. "How long did you serve?" 33 years, Frank answered. 2 wars, I lost friends I still see in my dreams. I tried to bring everyone home, I couldn't." His voice broke. The courtroom felt the pain behind each word. Those present no longer saw an old man with a ticket. They saw a soldier who once stood unbroken, now fighting a battle inside his own body. People in the back row leaned forward, pulled into his story. A young man in a baseball cap clasped his hands, eyes filled with admiration. An older woman dabbed a tear, remembering someone she lost. Some exchanged looks of disbelief that anyone could treat a man like this without honor. Judge Caprio's face showed pride and sadness together. He wasn't seeing a defendant. He was seeing a man who had carried the nation on his shoulders. The prosecutor kept his rigid stance, but the law. Caprio's expression stiffened. "We know the law," he said, "but we also know humanity." Frank lowered his eyes, embarrassed to be the center of attention. "I didn't want this to become such a big thing. I just needed medical help, that's all." A deep respect filled the room. People sat straighter, silently honoring him. No one looked away from his tired eyes. Judge Caprio placed his hands together, thoughtful and calm. "Mr. Miller," he said, "you have given more to this country than most people ever will. I want to understand your struggle fully." The prosecutor finally looked unsure of himself, realizing his impatience made him seem cold. Everyone wondered what decision could possibly honor a man who had already given everything. Everyone waited for Judge Frank Caprio's next words, because something about Frank Miller's story felt bigger than a traffic ticket. The judge leaned forward and asked gently, "Mr. Miller, can you tell us more about your condition?" "Whatever you're comfortable sharing." Frank took a long breath. His voice was soft, but every word carried a lifetime. "I served in Vietnam. I got hit more times than doctors thought a man could survive. They stitched me back together so I could go back in. That's what we did. We didn't quit." People in the courtroom sat absolutely still, as if even breathing too loudly would interrupt his truth. Frank continued, "Those scars you saw earlier, they came from trying to keep my brothers alive." He looked down, fingers shaking lightly over his cane. "I have trouble moving sometimes. The surgery, it made it harder." A woman in the second row covered her mouth, emotional already. A man in uniform lowered his head out of respect. Frank spoke with pauses, searching inside painful memories he had locked away for decades. "My wife passed 10 years ago. Since then, it's just been me in a small apartment. My pension barely covers food and medicine." His jaw tightened. I drove that day because I had no one to take me. I didn't want to end up in the hospital again. His honesty filled the room with a heavy, uncomfortable truth. This hero who once stood in the line of fire was now standing alone in life. The young prosecutor suddenly spoke, cold and sharp. So what you're saying, Mr. Miller, is that because you were in the military, you think you can ignore traffic laws? Gasps spread through the room. A shocked whisper rose like a wave. Is he serious? Someone murmured. Another person shook their head disgusted. Frank's eyes darkened with a familiar hurt, not physical but from being misunderstood after giving so much. He remained respectful. No, sir, I don't think that. I spent my whole life following rules. I'm just asking for understanding. The prosecutor crossed his arms. Everyone asks for understanding. The law is the law. The tension rose instantly. People stared at the prosecutor with disbelief. An elderly man in the gallery muttered, "Show some dignity, he fought for you." Frank kept his voice calm, because dignity was the only weapon he still carried. Those years overseas, they changed me. I still wake up to sounds that aren't there. I still feel danger when I'm just trying to buy groceries. You might not see the battles anymore, but they are still inside me. What? A wave of emotion washed across the room. Some wiped tears quietly. Others clenched their fists at how unfair life could be. Judge Caprio slowly removed his glasses. His expression showed deep discomfort with how the conversation had turned. He spoke firmly but with compassion. "Mr. Miller, I want you to know that sitting in this courtroom, you have already shown more courage than most people ever will." The prosecutor looked down, shifting awkwardly. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Judge Caprio asked, "Do you have any family or support?" Frank hesitated as if the answer was too small compared to all he once had. "No children, my siblings are gone. My neighbors check sometimes, but I don't want to be a burden." He swallowed hard. "I've always taken care of myself." The judge looked around the room, then back at Frank. "You served this country for decades. You protected the freedom that allows every person here to walk in peace. And now you live alone, barely getting by." His voice carried a mix of sadness and anger at the world's injustice. Frank nodded. "Life goes on, people forget. I don't blame anyone's." But the way his eyes glistened said everything. He did feel forgotten, and that loneliness hurt far more than any fine. The courtroom no longer saw an old man who missed a stop sign. They saw a soldier who gave everything and received almost nothing in return. Judge Caprio took a deep breath, choosing his next words carefully as he turned his attention back to the prosecutor. "Respect should not disappear just because time has passed," he said with clear warning in his voice. "This is not just another case." Everyone sensed what was coming. The judge was preparing to take control fully. The disrespect in the room had reached its limit, and Judge Caprio was not going to let it grow. The room could feel the pressure building. Judge Frank Caprio waited, hoping the young prosecutor would correct his attitude. But instead, the prosecutor leaned forward and spoke in a voice sharp enough to cut silence. "Mr. Miller should have planned better. Being a veteran doesn't make you special." What? The courtroom gasped as if the air was punched out of every chest at once. A woman whispered, "How dare he?" A man shook his head, looking ready to stand up in protest. Even the bailiff took a step forward, surprised someone would say such cruel words in front of Judge Caprio. Frank Miller lowered his head slowly, like an old flag being folded for the last time. Shame washed over him, even though he had done nothing wrong. His fingers curled around his cane as if trying to hold his pride together. Judge Caprio slammed his gavel so hard the sound bounced off every wall. His voice was strong and full of authority. "That comment is completely out of line. This man served our country. He deserves respect." What? The prosecutor tried to defend himself. "Your Honor, I'm simply stating that the law." Judge Caprio pointed a stern finger. "The law does not require cruelty." His words were calm but powerful enough to silence every whisper. Frank tried to speak, his voice uneven. "It's all right, Your Honor. Maybe I do make too many excuses. I don't want anyone to think I'm using my service for pity." He swallowed the pain that tightened his throat. "I lived a life of duty. Now I live quietly. People forget, I understand." But his face showed the truth he did not want to admit. Being forgotten hurts more than any battle scar. A woman in the back wiped tears from her eyes. She whispered to the person beside her, "He shouldn't have to apologize for serving us." Judge Caprio leaned forward gently. "Mr. Miller, I want to know more about you, not just the case. You said earlier you served in Vietnam. What honors were you awarded?" Frank hesitated, embarrassed by praise. "I have a couple of medals, sir, a Purple Heart too, actually, and a few others. They're in a small box at home. I don't look at them much anymore." What? The judge's voice softened even further. "Why not?" Frank looked down again, his eyes shining. "I used to think medals meant people would always remember us, but when I walk into a room now, nobody knows. Nobody cares that we stood in the rain, in the mud, in the fire. Nobody cares that we came home different than we left." A quiet sob broke out somewhere in the gallery. Frank continued slowly. So the medals stay in the box. The memories stay in me. I don't want to burden anyone with old stories. The judge placed a hand over his chest as if feeling the weight of every word. Mr. Miller, you are not a burden. This courtroom is honored to have you. What? Just then the prosecutor rolled his eyes, a disrespectful gesture so obvious that half the room gasped again. It felt like a slap in the face of every soldier who ever served. Judge Caprio saw it clearly. His jaw tightened. This was no longer just about a fine, it was about dignity. Frank tried once again to calm the moment. Please, sir, it's all right. I'm used to people not caring what I did long ago. What? His voice cracked and the courtroom broke a little inside. Judge Caprio spoke with a firm, protective tone. No, it is not all right. You carried a rifle so others could carry their children in safety. That will always matter. What? The judge's eyes locked onto the prosecutor. This was no longer professional correction. This was a demand for human respect. I expect better behavior from someone representing the law. What? The young prosecutor suddenly looked small, his confidence shrinking under the weight of every stare in the room. Frank wiped the corner of his eye, seen, heard, finally respected. Judge Caprio took a steady breath. Mr. Miller deserves our gratitude, and this court will treat him with it. The courtroom nodded in silent agreement. People felt anger, sadness, and pride all at once. The tension now had a direction. The judge was about to make a stand. Something had changed in that moment. The case wasn't just a case anymore. It was about honor. It was about whether society still remembered its heroes, and Judge Caprio was ready to prove that this man mattered. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Judge Frank Caprio looked at Frank Miller with eyes that carried both sorrow and admiration. He asked in a gentle voice, Mr. Miller, would you be willing to show the court what you've been through, only if you feel comfortable? Frank nodded slowly. If it helps people understand, then yes. His fingers trembled as they moved toward the buttons on his shirt. Every click of a button sounded like a memory breaking free. People leaned forward, not out of curiosity, but respect. They sensed this moment meant everything. The top of the shirt fell open first. A long scar stretched across his collarbone, thick and raised. Someone gasped softly. Frank kept going, unbuttoning one more than another. His chest became a canvas of pain and courage, deep lines from past surgeries, burns that never fully healed, marks that looked like they came from explosions and bullets. Some scars looked faded by time, others looked heartbreakingly new. A woman pressed both hands over her mouth. Another person whispered, "Oh my God," tears shimmered in the eyes of strangers who suddenly felt connected to him. Frank didn't speak, he didn't need to. His scars spoke louder than any story he could tell. He looked ashamed not of the scars but of having to prove his worth. His voice cracked as he whispered, "These are why I move slow. These are why I can't breathe right sometimes. I left parts of me on those fields so people here could come home whole." The courtroom was frozen in silence. The bailiff, a proud man who rarely showed emotion, placed a hand on his heart. A veteran sitting in the gallery wiped his tears with his sleeve. Even children in the back rows understood they were witnessing something sacred. Judge Caprio slowly rose from his chair. What he did next made the entire world inside that courtroom stop. He lifted his hand to his forehead and gave Frank a military salute. For a moment, Frank didn't move. He stared, shocked that someone of such authority, someone representing the justice system, would honor him so openly. The entire gallery stood. A wave of respect washed through the room like a rising tide. One by one, people saluted or placed hands over their hearts. Even the prosecutor, stiff and stunned, stood up without being told. Frank tried to stand too. He wanted to return the salute, but his legs shook under the weight of years and battles. Tears streamed down his face. His struggle was visible, but this time no one saw weakness. They only saw a hero trying his best. Judge Caprio spoke with a voice that carried the weight of every soldier Frank ever fought beside. Mr. Miller, on behalf of this courtroom and this country, thank you. We are here today because men like you refuse to bow down to fear. What? Frank whispered, I didn't expect anyone to care anymore. The prosecutor swallowed hard, guilt washing over him, as he realized his words earlier had struck a man who had carried the nation on his shoulders. He looked around, seeing what everyone else had seen all along. This wasn't just a man with a traffic ticket, this was someone who once risked never coming home. Judge Caprio turned his attention sharply to the prosecutor. Your attitude toward this veteran has been disrespectful and completely unacceptable. His tone was stern, his eyes full of fire. The young prosecutor's voice shook. I understand, Your Honor. Caprio wasn't done. You do not rush a man who survived war. You do not question his sacrifice as if it were a nuisance. He paused, allowing the words to sink deep. Every freedom you enjoy exists because he stood in harm's way. What? The courtroom nodded together, a unified force of agreement. Frank pulled his shirt back together slowly, wiping his tears discreetly. He whispered, "I'm sorry I caused such trouble." Judge Caprio cut in firmly, "You caused no trouble. The only trouble here is forgetting what people like you have done for us." Frank's breath trembled. His heart seemed to break open not from pain but from finally being seen. A dignity he thought he lost returned in that moment. Judge Caprio walked around his bench, moving closer to Frank not as a judge to a defendant but as a grateful citizen to a soldier. "You are not forgotten, not today, not ever." The prosecutor looked down, ashamed. His earlier confidence was replaced by regret. A lesson had struck him harder than any ruling ever could. The entire courtroom felt transformed. Fear and humiliation had been replaced with pride and honor. People smiled through tears, grateful they witnessed this transformation, grateful they now understood the price of their freedom. Frank's hands, once shaking with anxiety, now rested with quiet strength. His scars were still there, but they no longer made him feel alone. They made him feel respected. Judge Caprio returned to the bench. His voice held a promise. "This court will correct what society failed to give you: respect, support, and dignity." Everyone knew the turning point had arrived. Frank Miller came in feeling forgotten. He now stood in the center of a room filled with gratitude. The courtroom was still standing when Judge Frank Caprio returned to his seat, the emotion of the salute still heavy in the air. Frank Miller sat quietly, trying to control his breathing, trying to understand how the day had suddenly changed so much. He had walked in feeling invisible. Now every eye in the room saw him with honor. Judge Caprio cleared his throat, steady but deeply moved. "Mr. Miller, you came here today worried about paying a fine." He shook his head softly. "But you have already paid more than any fine could ever equal. You paid with your youth, with your health, with your peace of mind." Frank listened, feeling the words land on his heart like healing medicine. "This case is dismissed," Judge Caprio announced. "There will be no fine, not today, not ever." What? A wave of relief washed across Frank's face, but before he could thank the judge, Caprio held up his hand. "This is not enough." The gallery leaned forward, curious. "You should not be struggling alone," the judge continued. "You should not be choosing between food and medication. You should not have to drive yourself in pain because there is no one to help you." Frank blinked quickly, trying to keep tears from falling again. "Your Honor, I never wanted to be a burden." Caprio leaned closer. "Heroes are not burdens, heroes deserve support." The prosecutor stood up, his voice suddenly humble. "Your Honor, I would like to say something," he said, no longer sounding like the confident man from earlier. The room turned toward him, some still angry at his earlier words. He swallowed hard. "Mr. Miller, I was wrong. I spoke without thinking. I forgot what men like you have done for all of us. And I am sorry." Frank nodded softly. "Thank you," he replied, gracious even now, but Judge Caprio wasn't finished with the prosecutor. "Words are a start," he said firmly. "But the law is supposed to serve the people, not make them feel small." The prosecutor lowered his head. "I understand, Your Honor." Caprio softened again, turning back to Frank. "We live in a free country because you fought for that freedom. So this court is going to do more than dismiss a fine. We are going to help you get the support you deserve." Frank looked confused. "What do you mean, sir?" "What?" "We will connect you with organizations that can assist with medical care. We will ensure you have transportation for your appointments. You will not fight alone anymore." Someone in the courtroom began clapping quietly, then another joined. Soon gentle applause spread through the room, not loud like a celebration but soft and heartfelt, like a thank you whispered by many voices at once. Frank covered his mouth with his hand. The applause wasn't just for his service, it was for his strength to keep going all these years without asking for help. "I don't know what to say," Frank whispered, overwhelmed. Judge Caprio smiled warmly. "You don't need to say anything, just allow us to do for you what you once did for us." The prosecutor, still standing, wiped his eye quickly before anyone could notice. But people did notice, and they saw the lesson taking root inside him. Frank sighed, a long breath he had needed to release for years. "Sometimes when I sit alone at night, I wonder if anyone remembers us. If anyone cares that we were there." The judge replied, "We care, and today," he whispered, "thank you, all of you." The judge tapped the bench lightly. "Justice is not just about rules, Mr. Miller. It's about doing what is right. And doing what is right means giving you back the dignity you never should have lost." What? With those words, the courtroom stood again, not because they had to, but because their hearts told them to. Frank Miller sat quietly, still trying to process everything that had just happened. A moment ago, he felt like the world had forgotten him. Now a whole courtroom stood by his side. It was a change so powerful he struggled to hold back tears. Judge Frank Caprio looked across the room. "Is there anyone here from a veteran support organization?" he asked with hope in his voice. A woman wearing a small lapel pin shaped like an eagle raised her hand. She stood up proudly. "Yes, Your Honor." I'm from the Providence Veterans Support Foundation. She stepped forward. We help veterans with medical arrangements, home visits, transportation, social support, and anything that restores their dignity. Frank stared at her like he wasn't sure he heard correctly. You help people like me. She smiled warmly, especially people like you. Frank's lips trembled again. The idea that someone wanted to help not because they were forced to, but because they cared felt almost unreal. Judge Caprio nodded with relief. Mr. Miller is exactly who our community must stand behind. He will need transportation to his medical appointments. Can your organization arrange that? Absolutely, Your Honor, starting immediately. Frank lifted a hand slightly, almost like he wanted to stop this kindness from coming. I don't want to cause trouble. Others need help more than I do. The judge shook his head. No one needs help more or less than someone who sacrificed their health for his country. You are worthy of support. Frank lowered his eyes. It's just hard to accept help when you spent your whole life being the one who helps others. A man in the gallery called out gently, "Let us help now." His voice cracked with respect. The woman from the organization continued, "We will also make sure you have someone to check on you regularly. You won't be alone anymore." Frank's hand covered his chest, holding back a flood of emotion. For years he lived surrounded by silence, the kind that eats away at a man's spirit. Now suddenly there were voices promising comfort. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, heroes like you should never feel abandoned. You served so that we could feel safe. Now we will serve you so you can feel supported." Frank nodded, his chin shaking. "I forgot what it felt like to be seen," he said softly. A young woman in the courtroom wiped her eyes. "You deserve the world to see you," she whispered loud enough for him to hear. Frank let out a small, emotional laugh, the kind that hides years of pain. "Thank you, I truly don't know how to repay any of you." The judge answered immediately. "You already paid the price long ago and far from here." The entire room agreed with their silence. Frank straightened up a little in his seat. His face looked brighter now, not because the scars disappeared, but because dignity had returned to him. The loneliness he carried like a heavy backpack began to slide off his shoulders. Judge Caprio added, "We will also follow up with you. The court, the organization, and the community. This isn't helping you for one day, this is the beginning of making sure you are cared for every day." Frank blinked, letting that promise settle into his heart. "It feels like a miracle," he said. "No," Judge Caprio smiled. "It's what you earned." People in the gallery nodded, many brushing away tears. They knew they were witnessing more than justice. They were witnessing a man rediscover his place in a country he once defended. Frank finally gathered the courage to look around. "Thank you for not letting me disappear," he said to every face in the room. The judge responded gently, "We should be thanking you." Frank looked stronger already, his back straighter, his spirit rising. The scars were still there, but now they looked like medals. Healing had officially begun. A few weeks passed. The seasons hadn't changed, but something inside Frank Miller definitely had. He walked back into the same courtroom where his life had been turned around, but this time his steps were steadier. His cane still guided him, yet he held it like a friend, not a lifeline. His back was a little straighter. His face carried something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. Comment where you're watching from. When the courtroom staff saw him, they smiled like they were greeting an old friend. The bailiff gave him a respectful nod. The people waiting for their cases whispered to each other, recognizing the hero who once revealed the scars of war to remind the world of its debt. Judge Frank Caprio looked up and lit up with a proud smile. "Mr. Miller," he said warmly, "it is very good to see you again." Frank smiled back, not a shy smile anymore, but one full of grateful confidence. "Good morning, Your Honor." The judge noticed the difference right away. "You look stronger." Frank chuckled softly. "That's what I've been told. The doctors say the same thing, and I've had more visitors in the last 3 weeks than I've had in the last 10 years. The gallery listened, happy just to hear his voice brighter. Frank continued, "The Veterans Foundation has been wonderful. They check on me every few days. They make sure I have groceries and someone drives me to my appointments. Sometimes they just come by to talk." His eyes softened with emotion. "I didn't realize how much I needed that." Judge Caprio nodded gently. "Human connection is part of healing too." Frank took a breath that didn't hurt as much anymore. "I feel respected again, sir, like I'm part of something not forgotten. It's been a blessing." In the front row, the prosecutor from Frank's previous hearing stood up. His expression was sincere, nothing like the arrogant young man from before. He placed a hand over his heart. "Mr. Miller," he said quietly, "I want to apologize again, truly. I failed to honor you. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn what respect really means." Frank nodded kindly. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "We all learn lessons at different times." The prosecutor lowered his head, grateful for forgiveness. Judge Caprio folded his hands thoughtfully. "Mr. Miller, America must never forget the people who sacrificed their youth for its freedom. Too many heroes go unseen after the battle's end. That is wrong. And your presence here has reminded us all of something powerful. Everyone leaned in, waiting. Respect is not a polite gesture, the judge continued. It is a duty to honor those who stood between danger and our homes. A duty to care for those who protected the generations that came after them. Frank's eyes shined with a renewed sense of worth. The judge smiled warmly. How have you been feeling emotionally, Mr. Miller? Frank placed a hand over his heart. Like I can breathe again, like the world can see me now. I even cleaned off my medals and placed them on my shelf. I look at them once in a while and I feel proud again. He paused. I didn't realize how much one act of kindness could change a man. The courtroom grew deeply silent, absorbing the truth in his statement. Frank looked down for a moment, collecting himself. Your Honor, thank you. You reminded me that what I did still matters. The judge stood slowly, his voice respectful. Mr. Miller, what you did will always matter. Then, just like that unforgettable moment weeks earlier, Judge Caprio brought his hand to his forehead and saluted him once more. Frank's breath caught in his chest, but this time he didn't struggle. He rose, steady and proud, and returned the salute with strength in his arm and honor in his eyes. The entire courtroom stood too. They didn't clap loudly, they didn't need